Good morning and Happy New Year. Russia's war in Ukraine is nearing its 2-year anniversary. What are the stakes for Russian President Vladimir Putin at home and abroad in the new year? It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Rob Schmitz. Companies throughout the world will embrace artificial intelligence in the new year. We'll hear about companies using AI to help mitigate global warming. Electronic nose, anyone? Also, the U.S. economy did better than expected last year, so what's this year going to look like? It's Monday, January 1st. On this day in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. It freed more than 3.5 million enslaved people in the secessionist Confederate States. News is next.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. In a New Year's Eve speech, Israel's defense minister warned of a long war in Gaza. Israeli troops continue intense fighting in and around central Gaza. NPR's Carrie Kahn reports, hours after the defense minister's message, Hamas militants lobbed a barrage of rockets toward Tel Aviv.
That was minutes after midnight. Air raid sirens sounded in southern and central Israel, signaling incoming rocket fire from Gaza. No damage inside Israel was reported. Hamas issued a statement on its Telegram channel saying the barrage was in response to Israel's continued massacre of civilians. Health officials in Gaza and the Associated Press say at least 35 more Palestinians were killed in the previous 24 hours from Israeli airstrikes in central Gaza. That brings the death toll since the start of the war to more than 21,000, according to Gaza's health ministry. Israel's military spokesman warned that, quote, as 2024 begins, the objectives of the war require prolonged fighting, and we are preparing accordingly, he said. Carrie Kahn, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
There has been a swarm of earthquakes that hit central Japan today. The U.S. Geological Survey says the strongest had a magnitude of 7.5. Japan has posted tsunami warnings. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un says conflict is increasingly likely. He blames moves by the U.S. and South Korean militaries. NPR's Anthony Kuhn reports from Seoul. Kim is ramping up the North's military technology in response.
State media quote Kim is telling military commanders Sunday that if the U.S. and South Korea choose confrontation, the North's military should annihilate them without hesitation. Over the weekend, Kim told a ruling party plenum that Seoul and Washington's hostile policies now make unification of the two Koreas impossible. Kim said North Korea would beef up its nuclear and missile arsenals, build more military drones, and launch 3 more military reconnaissance satellites in 2024, following its first successful launch in November. And with both South Korean and U.S. elections this year, experts see plenty of opportunities for North Korea to stage attention-grabbing military provocations. Anthony Kuhn, NPR News, Seoul.
With the arrival of the new year, the presidential election cycle is well underway for 2024. NPR's Domenico Montanaro is tracking the 2 Republican candidates who are trying to dislodge former President Donald Trump. This from his leading place in Republican polls.
Big question for me in this primary is whether Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis can actually give former President Trump a real run for this nomination. I mean, to this point, Trump is led by huge margins in the polls, and so much of what we've been talking about in this race is really the race for second place. Voting is just weeks away here, with Iowa kicking off January 15th.
NPR's Domenico Montanaro prepared that report. You're listening to NPR News from Washington. Ukraine and Russia both reported attacks today. Russian-installed officials in eastern Ukraine say Ukrainian forces fired at them. Ukrainian officials say Russia fired drones into Ukraine. News reports say at least 5 people have been killed. Owning a pet can be good for your health. That's according to a new study in the medical journal JAMA. NPR's Sydney Lupkin has more.
Cognitive decline is normal as people age, but it's thought to happen faster among people living alone. It turns out having a pet can help slow that decline. Research published in JAMA, or the Journal of the American Medical Association, included data about nearly 8,000 adults who were 50 and older. The study authors found that among older adults living alone, those with pets had slower declines in their verbal memory and verbal fluency test scores. These tests measure cognitive ability and included things like listing as many animal names as possible in 1 minute. However, the study found pet ownership didn't offer the same benefit to adults living with other people. The authors say more studies are needed to dig deeper. Sydney Lupkin, NPR News.
The federal government has issued a recall notice for a children's toy. This is a magnetic ball kit that is found at Walmart.com. The Consumer Product Safety Commission reports if the toy is swallowed by a child, the small balls could clump together in the digestive system. Stock markets are closed today for the New Year's holiday. The main stock indice gains were in the double digits in 2023. I'm Corva Coleman, NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the George Lucas Educational Foundation, creator of Edutopia, dedicated to improving the learning experience for America's students by sharing what works in pre-K through 12 education at edutopia.org.
You're listening to Morning Edition right here on North Country Public Radio. It's about 5 after 8. Good morning. I'm Monica Sandreski. Coming up on the program, healthy habits. People typically take stock and resolve to make healthy changes around the new year. Blue zones, the longest-lived communities on Earth, offer lessons on habits that promote health and longevity. And we'll hear about some of them coming up at 8:21 right here on NCPR, which is supported by the Adirondack Experience, the museum on Blue Mountain Lake, hosting their new In the Adirondack Library online series each month. Details at the adkx.org. And by Apothecary Chocolates, making gourmet chocolates by hand from all natural herbs, botanicals, and tree syrups. apothecarychocolates.com. Last check, it was 20 degrees in Alexandria Bay, 18 degrees in Chateauguay, and 17 degrees in Old Forge. Mostly sunny skies in the forecast today with highs in the mid-20s expected. Clear overnight with the lows in the teens. And tomorrow, mostly cloudy with highs in the upper 20s to about 30 degrees. And cloudy skies in the forecast for Wednesday, too, with highs around freezing expected. This is NCPR. It's 8:07.
This is Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Rob Schmitz. The closing days of 2023 saw major aerial assaults from both sides of the war in Ukraine. Russian drones and missiles pounded the eastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv. Moscow said it was retaliating after Ukraine struck the Russian border city of Belgorod, where at least 24 people were killed. In mid-December, Russian President Vladimir Putin declared that there will be no peace in Ukraine until Russia achieves its goals. For more insight on what's to come, Nina Khrushcheva joins me now. She's professor of international affairs at the New School. Hello, Nina.
Hi.
So, Nina, the war will soon enter its third year. What do you think will be Putin's next steps in this war and beyond that?
Well, the next step in this war is going to be war, because Putin, as he said, he's going to achieve all his goals, and he will achieve all these goals. It has been going on for almost 2 years. And so far, he hasn't lost. So the fact that he hasn't lost suggests to him that eventually he's going to win. So he's going to fight for as long as it takes, especially because there's not elections. He's going to become president again next March for another 6 years. So he has all the time in the world as long as he's well.
Can Russia's military handle a prolonged war like that, like you're framing?
Well, it has been. I mean, it's interestingly enough, for the first half a year, it was a lot of discombobulation. It didn't seem that Russia could handle it, although it did push through somewhat. But now it has fixed its military production. It's actually increased. It has a lot of volunteer fighters that are paid a lot of money to go to Ukraine. So it's about 600,000 people now at the front, more than that. And they're still signing up because, once again, for them, it's their life income. And so they figured out that formula that can last for, I don't know, another year, 2 years, even 3 years, unless something else happens, because war is something that is incredibly unpredictable.
So when this war began, Western countries imposed sanctions on Russia. What impact have they had?
Well, that was sort of an interesting thing because the goal was of the sanctions to change Russia's behavior, to change Putin's behavior. In fact, it didn't change Putin's behavior. It actually exasperated it because this blanket sanction suggested that he was saying that the West is out to get us. In fact, many Russians kind of buy this kind of rhetoric because it did destroy or hamper the Russian life, and sort of there's a lot of animosity coming towards all Russia, all the Russians. And so in some ways it actually worked for Putin. He's a very lucky man in this because even the horrible environments he's able to turn somehow to a degree in his favor. So he's not unpopular. I would say 60% of people realistically support Putin.
So I'm curious, what do you think is Putin's vision for Russia, as it becomes more isolated from the West, on the world stage?
It's a $1 billion question because the vision now, it's a unique civilization that as long as the world the West doesn't understand it, we're just going to show the world that we, the Russians, are so special and unique. And that's his goal. His goal is to say, we've been disregarded. Russia has been disregarded. We are not listened to. Russia has not been listened to. And so now we make them. And so that's his goal. His goal is to say, okay, Russia, we hear you. We know you can do a lot of damage. So what do you propose? And that's kind of fight for respect that he thinks Russia has never got in the last 30 years since the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991.
And I'm wondering how you see what's happening now in Gaza and how this could influence his sort of chess game that he's playing here. As the United States gets more and more heat for its role in the Gaza conflict, does Putin see an opportunity to bolster maybe, Russia's image on the world stage?
And he has seen it and he's done it. And that's, what I'm saying, he's an incredibly lucky man because, we saw today, the first New Year Day, demonstrations in Turkey against kind of Western support of Israel because Israel is a genocidal towards Palestinians. And so that has been Putin's argument, is that the Western colonial powers, they treat the lesser powers, so to speak, with disregard. And so it actually kind of fits into his rhetoric. And a lot of those who may have thought that or could come to the Western side now actually may side with Putin to some degree on that.
That's Nina Khrushcheva, professor of international affairs at the New School. Nina, thank you.
Thank you.
In America and much of the West, the New Year starts with a party. In Pakistan and Afghanistan, January 1st is a day of many, many birthdays. But they are rarely celebrated. Why? The answer lies in the different ways we see time. NPR's Dia Hadid reports.
Ask in any Pakistani or Afghan town when someone's birthday is, and it's not unusual to hear January 1st.
Day 1/1/1993.
We always just went by Jan 1, 1939 for his birthday, for how old he was, everything.
1/1/1992 hai. 1st January hai.
There's no readily available data, but anecdotally, one Western visa officer tells me it was so common in applications, he initially thought there was a glitch. Wahid Rahman, an Afghan man living in Ireland, tells me that when he helped asylum seekers, officials soon learned to ask for just the year that Afghans were born.
Okay, your date of birth is, 1st January, but which year?
Those whose birthdays are on 1/1 include Hamza Ghori. He's from southern Pakistan. He says his parents picked 1/1 because it's easy to remember.
It is convenient to them because date of birth is just a formality. We don't celebrate birthdays.
The day was convenient, just a formality. We don't celebrate birthdays. Ghori's parents, like many in the region, didn't write down when he was born. They didn't remember it. They didn't even register his birth for years. Not until he had to go to school. The same happened to Adnan Khan. He's a journalist from the rugged mountains that straddle Pakistan and Afghanistan. And when he was a kid, his uncle enrolled him in school. For that, Khan needed a birth date for the forms.
So my uncle just wrote there that I was born on 1st January for getting admission in the school.
Knowing our day of birth is so fundamental to who we are in the West. But Khan says many conservative Muslims frown on adopting Western celebrations, like birthdays.
They don't celebrate birthdays because they think this is not an Islamic thing to do.
So if you don't celebrate a day, why would you remember it? And there's another context. Many folks whose birthdays are recorded as 1-1 belong to societies where many can't read or write.
Hello?
Afrasiab Khatak is a former lawmaker and expert on the culture of Pashtuns. They're an ethnic group who live in Pakistan and Afghanistan.
You see, writing of age, date of birth is a recent phenomenon. It was not always recorded. We were an oral society for a long time.
Khatak says to mark a birth, people would refer to a big event, like
when First World War was taking place, Second World War was taking place.
As for a man's age, well, traditionally, Pashtun men wear a cap and wrap a turban around it. So when a man died,
when they would bury him, they would ask, how old was he?
And the answer might be,
he had consumed 8 caps. 1 cap will normally exist for a decade. This is how they would measure their lifespan.
A life measured out in worn-out caps instead of days and years. Of course, the culture is changing unevenly. In the cities, there's certainly people who celebrate birthdays. There's even a standard happy birthday song. And in remote areas, like where Adnan Khan is from,
we have children now, so we very frequently are celebrating their birthdays.
I got thinking about this story a while ago because my own father, Ali Hadid, never knew his own birthday. He was born in a village in Lebanon. And if you asked him when he was born, he'd say, 6 days after the bull. That is, after the cow gave birth to a bull calf. He was from a family that raised cows. Having a bull was a big deal. Dad migrated to Australia and raised us there, where birthdays are a big deal. But he could never quite remember our birthdays. When you're raised without one, it doesn't come naturally to remember random days of the year that happen to be when your kids are born. So we'd remind him, and his face would brighten. He'd do a little dance and sing this Lebanese classic.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
My dad passed away on December 31st, 2022. And as evening fell, Australians began celebrating New Year's Eve. Dad died on a day that was a big event, on a day easy to remember. And a few hours later, many Pakistanis and Afghans marked the passing of another official year of their lives on a day easy to remember. Dia Hadid, NPR News.
To hear the story, listen to NPR on your smartphone, smart speaker, or on your good old-fashioned radio. This is NPR News.
I don't know about you, but I loved hearing that story from Dia Hadid. So much to appreciate in storytelling with NPR and North Country Public Radio. Definitely something I'm grateful for this time of year. Good morning. I'm Monica Sandreski. It's about 20 after 8. So glad you could join us here on NCPR, which is supported by the Village Mercantile, bringing Saranac Lake to places beyond the Adirondacks, offering Adirondack-made and inspired goods. VillageMerc.com anything but general. Coming up on the program, we'll be taking a look at the state of the economy in the coming year. The U.S. economy performed better than many people expected in 2023. So what's ahead for the new year? Forecasters expect somewhat slower growth and lower inflation. We'll hear more context from Scott Horsley coming up in about 15 minutes right here on North Country Public Radio. Then join us later this evening for A Way with Words at 9 o'clock. This week on the show, if you skip wearing underwear, you're said to be going commando. This bit of slang originated during the Vietnam War when U.S. commandos had compelling reasons to do without that particular piece of clothing. Plus, Watergate salad is a mixture of pistachio pudding with whipped cream and pineapple. This dish was popularized in the 1970s, but what does it have anything to do with the scandal that brought down a president? Well, we'll consider that and find out more coming up later this evening on A Way with Words between 9 and 10 o'clock right here on NCPR. It's 8:21.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Viking, committed to exploring the world in comfort, offering small ship experiences with a shore excursion included in every port and programs designed for cultural enrichment. Learn more at Viking.com. From Procter & Gamble, maker of Align Probiotic, a daily supplement designed by gastroenterologists to help relieve occasional bloating, gas, and abdominal discomfort. More at alignprobiotics.com. From the Kauffman Foundation, providing access to opportunities that help people achieve financial stability, upward mobility, and economic prosperity, regardless of race, gender, or geography. Kauffman.org. And from the sustaining members of this NPR station.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Rob Schmitz.
And I'm A. Martinez. New Year's Day is typically the day to resolve to do some things differently. There's a lot of research on what changes can lead to healthier living. Joining us now is NPR's Allison Aubrey. Allison, so you've been covering health and wellness for a long time. So what are the things that can really make a difference?
You know, we are always hoping there's something magical on the horizon, some superfood, some kind of new exercise trend that is going to catapult us to great health, right? But the reality is much less sensational. I'd say increasingly a lot of the science points to 6 or 7 key habits. And these are things people have heard about before. It's what we eat, how we move, how much we sleep, having strong social connections and purpose. When you put all these together, they are a powerful combination. Whether you're thinking about preventing heart disease, dementia, diabetes, and to some extent even depression, these habits really can make a difference.
Yeah, I've always said that, we know what to do. The thing is starting and sticking to it.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd say modern society kind of steers us in the wrong direction. Our food supply is full of junk. Our communities typically are not built to encourage walking. The pace of our lives can feel stressful and leave us kind of feeling alone. So I want to talk about some of the longest lived communities around the globe. This is something that I know you and I have been thinking about and reporting on this year.
Yeah, one of my favorite documentaries and books this year was Living to 100, Secrets of the Blue Zones. We both spoke to the author, so let's listen to a bit of your reporting.
One of the most counterintuitive things about the men and women who thrive into their 90s and beyond is that they're not really trying to be healthy. Here's National Geographic explorer Dan Buettner, who identified 5 places around the globe with the highest concentration of centenarians. He calls them blue zones.
People in blue zones, they're not thinking about their diet or an exercise program. They're not doing anything except living their lives.
Lots of blue zoners live on islands. There's Sardinia off the coast of Italy, Icaria, a Greek island in the Aegean Sea, and Okinawa, a chain of islands 1,000 miles from Tokyo. One of the things they all have in common is the way they eat. Simple foods they tend to cook at home.
The 5 pillars of any longevity diet in the world are whole grains, greens or garden vegetables, tubers like sweet potatoes, nuts as a snack, and then beans. About a cup of beans a day is associated with an extra 4 years of life expectancy.
They're not vegetarians, but they eat about 1/10 the amount of meat found in the typical American diet. There's a little cheese, a little fish, And they cook with lots of aromatic herbs and plants, often from their own gardens.
It's the peasant food, but the important thing is they know how to make that peasant food taste delicious, and that's the secret.
When it comes to exercise, they don't go to the gym. They build movement into their daily lives. Take their gardens. Food isn't just a source of nourishment. The act of gardening keeps them bending and squatting and using their muscles.
You have a garden, it nudges you to weed and water and harvest almost every day.
So they're weaving activity and movement into just everyday life.
Funny thing, Allison, I have one of those Japanese sweet potatoes waiting for me as soon as we wrap up this interview, so I can't wait to get to it. It's true. I absolutely do. I can smell it from the other room. Now, I plan to be around half a century from now at 100. The thing is, though, not everyone, though, lives in these great, big, beautiful blue zones.
That's right. I mean, we can't, but there are things we can borrow. One thing I've been trying to do, inspired by the blue zones, is I've been spending more time on my yoga mat. When I have, 5 or 10 minutes on days when I'm working from home, I try to get on the floor and bend and stretch. And this is something that Buettner saw happening naturally in Japan.
In Okinawa, people sit on the floor. They sit on tatami mats, on very low tables. I sat for 2 days with a 104-year-old woman who got up and down off the floor 30 times. Those are squats. That makes stronger lower bodies. It makes for better balance. It makes for more open hips and flexibility, probably healthier backs, and much fewer falls.
And this is really key because as we age, falls are responsible for a lot of injury. In fact, they're the leading cause among older people. So no matter how old you are, why not begin to build a habit of building strength training into your everyday life?
Yeah, so we've talked about a healthy diet, exercise, and strength training. What else can we borrow from those blue zones?
I think another through line is that the people in the blue zones tend to form tight social bonds. In Okinawa, for instance, there are small groups called moais where people tend to really rely on each other. They show up for each other. To some extent, if you're living in a remote area, disconnected from modern life and conveniences, people need to be more reliant on neighbors and close friends. But I think it's telling, at a time when we hear so much about loneliness and disconnection, that people who live in more traditional communities and live more simply have engineered connection into daily life.
All right, so what are those workarounds then? I mean, how do we form these bonds in our communities?
Something I was really struck by this year is that in addition to reporting on these blue zones, I also covered a study. It was published in Nature Mental Health. It was this very comprehensive look at depression. Researchers tracked hundreds of thousands of people for years to find out how these very habits we've been talking about, diet, exercise, sleep, social connections, were tied to episodes of depression. And they found that people who maintained most of the healthy habits had about a 50% lower risk of depression. Now, of course, a lot of people need medication to help with depression, but I think it is striking because it's a reminder of the importance of daily routines and everyday choices and habits.
Yeah, so that means that these habits then can influence not just physical health, but mental health.
Yeah, and I think there's a challenge here. I mean, think about it. Society is always pushing us or nudging us kind of in the wrong direction. We scroll on social media instead of engaging with others. But these studies are a reminder that we sometimes have to push back against societal norms in order to be healthy and happy.
All right, Allison, hopefully we have this conversation in 2073 as well. NPR's health correspondent, Allison Aubrey. Allison, thanks.
I look forward to it. Thank you,
Support for NPR health coverage comes from Procter & Gamble, maker of ZzzQuil Pure Z's gummies, designed with melatonin for occasional sleeplessness to help people fall asleep naturally. Learn more at ZzzQuil.com.
This is NPR News.
In 2023, themes of girlhood were all the rage, from the Barbie movie to ballet flats.
Things feel sort of dour and morose and serious, and girlhood is sort of an obvious way to introduce some of that lightness back into our lives.
More on one of this year's pinkest trends on All Things Considered from NPR News.
Join us for ATC this evening and every evening at 5 o'clock right here on North Country Public Radio, which is supported by the Village Mercantile, bringing Saranac Lake to places beyond the Adirondacks. offering Adirondack-made and inspired goods. VillageMerc.com, anything but general. This is NCPR. It's 8:30.